Okay, everybody, welcome to my podcast. We're reading Electional Astrology by Vivian Robson. I want to thank you for joining us. We are live on Clubhouse. We are live on YouTube. We are live on Instagram on multiple accounts. Bear with me here. Just chit chatting with people outside. Fuck, did I end the room? God damn it. I swear, nothing ever goes right when you need it to. You know what? Fuck it. Fuck Clubhouse. It's a waste of time. This is going to be a 20-minute video recording. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy. Namaste. Again, we're reading Electional Astrology and sipping a little coffee and smoking a little cannabis. Bear with me here. Here we go. All right, we're live and ready to go. Thanks, everybody. Electional Astrology by Vivian E. Robson. Introduction, general principles, the moon in electional astrology, the lunar mansions and aspects, planetary hours, personal elections, domestic elections, commerce and finance, business and occupation, friendship and favor, medical elections, marriage and children, journeys and messages, games and sports, wars, fights and lawsuits, agriculture and gardening, animals, prisoners and criminals, public affairs. Chapter 1, Introduction. The subject of electional astrology, or more simply elections, is concerned with the choosing or electing of propitious times for the commencement of any undertaking. Essentially, it is the converse of horary astrology, for though its methods and procedure are similar, it starts from the point at which horary astrology finishes and works back to the point at which the latter begins. To put the matter rather more explicitly, let us assume that a business is to be started. The businessman selects a date and time based upon reasons of convenience or some other practical consideration, and this automatically becomes the birth time of the undertaking. A horoscope set for this time is a horary figure, or as Carter aptly terms it, an inceptional figure, and by applying the rules of horary astrology, one can predict the ups and downs of the business then begun and its ultimate success or failure. But it is obvious that there is another way of going to work. If the horoscope for the start shows failure, why not begin at some other time when the horoscope favors the venture? In other words, why not choose a suitable horoscope first and fit everything else into that? This is the theory upon which elections are based, and electional astrology is concerned with the rules to be followed in building up a favorable horoscope to suit any given purpose. The general principle of making an election is extremely simple. We have to take the planetary positions as we find them within a certain limit of time and arrange them into a horoscope diagram so that the planets ruling the matter concerned are as strong and free from affliction as we can make them, and all the hindrances and afflicting positions are tucked neatly away there where they can do the least possible harm. This process of making any given planet, strong as it can be, is known as fortifying it. It consists in placing the planet in a favorable sign at an angle, or an appropriate house, and in so arranging the date that it receives good aspects from the benefics Venus and Jupiter, and is not afflicted, nor in some cases aspected at all by the malefics Mars, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Unfortunately, we are always very dependent upon the general planetary positions at the time, and it is usually quite impossible to make an ideal election, because the planets will most disobligingly refuse to arrange themselves suitably within the time limit at our disposal. In such cases, we have to do the best we can with the available material, but with a little trouble it will always be found possible to obtain an election that is reasonably satisfactory. The subject is usually divided into three broad classes according to the basis upon which the electional map is made, and we have to consider radical elections, mundane elections, and ephemeral or horary elections. Electional astrology. Number 1, radical elections. Every writer upon the subject of elections agrees that the birth horoscope of the person for whom the election is made is of paramount importance. As Ptolemy puts it in the 6th aphorism of his Centiloquy, It is advantageous to make choice of days and hours at a time well constituted by the nativity. Should the time be adverse, the choice will in no respect avail, however favorable an issue it may chance to promise. Should the nativity or directions indicate failure in any matter, no election can possibly bring success, and the reader must not imagine for one moment that a knowledge of election or astrology is the master key to all wealth and happiness. Any experienced astrologer can multiply instances in which an election has been made for something against the indication of the radical or progressed horoscope, and failure has resulted. Generally, it is found to be impossible to use the time elected, for one obstacle after another arises until finally the business is begun at quite a different time, which of course proves to be in harmony with the adverse influences prevailing in the radical horoscope. There are two obvious lessons to be learnt from this, namely that it is essential to study the birth map first of all in order to determine the radical chances of success in the matter under consideration, and secondly that a horoscope for an election should be based primarily upon that of birth. The latter constitutes a radical election as distinct from an ephemeral one which is not concerned with the radical horoscope. Unfortunately, many people do not know the birth times, and therefore a radical election is impossible in their cases. But apart from this, it is really a task beyond the power of the human mind to blend all the conflicting factors of the ephemeral positions and those of the radical and progressed maps into one whole at all successfully, so that, for all practical purposes, it is better not to attempt to do so except in a quite general way. But it cannot be too strongly emphasized that in all cases where the birth map is obtainable, it is essential to see that it will allow of success either generally or at the particular time, for otherwise failure is inevitable. All right, I'm going to quickly flip through this book. I hate reading stuff about birth times. I feel like that's just a bunch of nonsense. So I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to try to find some bullet points or some kind of indentation, something to show that there's a little something significant. All right, this is called electional astrology. Fifth house elections. Fortify the sign of the radical fifth house and put it or its lord in the electional second, placing Jupiter or Venus in good aspect to the cusp of the fifth. Debilitate the seventh house and its lord, but be careful not to afflict the ascendant and its lord. Sixth house elections. Fortify the moon. Place it in Taurus, Gemini, Virgo, Capricorn. Let the lord of the radical second be in the electional sixth in good aspect to the ascendant or its lord. Seventh house elections, fortifying the lord of the seventh in the moon, taking care that they are unafflicted by the malefics or by Cauda. Place Leo or Aquarius upon the ascendant. Eighth house elections, fortify the ascendant, its lord in the moon, letting the lord of the ascendant in the moon apply to a good aspect of Saturn. Ninth house elections, take care to keep the lords of the radical and electional ninth house free from affliction. 10th house elections, place the radical 10th cusp upon the electional ascendant and fortify the moon and the lords of the ascendant and 10th. 11th house elections, place Jupiter and Venus in the 11th hour, fortifying the lord of the 11th and placing it in good aspect to the lord of the radical ascendant. 12th house elections, keep the lord of the ascendant and the moon free from affliction and place them in good aspect with the lord of the radical 12th. The above rules are quite general ones, must not be considered in any other light, for they may need modification in accordance with the actual business of the election, as will be seen in later chapters. Chapter 3, the Moon and Electional Astrology. Electional astrology number 1. When combust or within 12 inches, when ancient astrologers considered the moon to be impedited or weakened in 10 ways. 1. When combust or within 12 degrees from the moon, this was considered a worse affliction when applying than when separating. After having separated 5 degrees, the worst of the effect is over. In her fall in M and especially in M, 3 degrees, the exact degree of fall. Oh my God. I don't know, is that the degree of fall? Okay, so number 9, Altar, favorable for voyages but bad for land journeys, causes quarrels and is bad for planting and sowing. El Jabha, favorable for love affairs and marriage building, obtaining help from others and planting and sowing, bad for voyages. Al Zubra, Good for voyages, commerce, arranging bail for prisoners, rescuing captives, and for planting and sowing. Bad for taking purgatives. So, the Arabic name, initial degree, and electional influence of each of the mansions is as follows: Al-Sharatain or Al-Nath. Good for travel and taking medicine, especially laxatives. Avoid quarrels. 2. Al-Butain, good for treasure hunting, taking prisoners and captives, traveling by water, buying animals, and planting and sowing. 3. Al-Thuraya, good for hunting, chemical work, buying and selling, and journeys by land but not by water. El-Dabaran, an unfavorable mansion, bad for building, mining, digging wells, and constructing fountains, for it causes hindrances and destruction in such work. Bad for marriage and voyages, good for planting and sowing. It produces flights and of creeping things and causes quarrels. Al-Haka, favorable for building, returning from journeys, sending children to school or college, commerce, voyages, marriage, and medical treatment. Al-Hanna, favorable for hunting, besieging towns, and beginning wars and punitive expeditions. Bad for planting and sowing, medical treatment, and all peaceful operations. Al-Dira, favorable for money matters, friendship, love affairs, and planting and sowing. Bad for any kind of travel and for people in authority. It is said to be favorable for ridding a place of flies. El-Nathra, favorable for love, friendship, social affairs, journeys, and medical treatment. It is said to drive away mice and to be bad for prisoners and captives. Tough, favorable for voyages, but bad for land journeys, causes quarrels, is bad for planting and sowing. El-Gafar, favorable for treasure seeking, mining, all kinds of digging and excavation, and beginning lawsuits. Bad for marriage, social intercourse, building, and travel. El-Jubana, except for the freeing of prisoners, this mansion is unfavorable for everything, and especially for journeys, marriage, trade, and agricultural work. Iqlil al-Jabha, favorable for love affairs, building, buying, animals, and general business, but bad for voyages. Al-Kalb, favorable for building, planting, and sowing, voyages, freeing prisoners, starting lawsuits, and secret operations. Bad for marriage. Al-Shawla, favorable for warlike operations, besieging cities, naval warfare. It is good for planting and sowing, voyages, and lawsuits, but tends to cause loss of position. El-Nam, favorable for hunting, buying, training, and taming animals, and for strengthening prisons and strong rooms. It is bad for company, promoting, and for marriage. El-Balda, favorable for building, planting, and sowing, business, traveling, and legal transactions, but bad for marriage as it conduces to divorce. Favorable for voyages and medical treatment, bad for buying or wearing new clothes, and for engaging servants. That's Al-Sa'ad al-Dalbi. Al-Sa'ad al-Bulla, favorable for medical treatment, freeing prisoners, and voyages. Bad for marriage and for borrowing and lending money. Al-Sa'ad al-Sa'ud, favorable for marriage, medical treatment, planting and sowing, and for beginning war, although it hinders the action of the government. Al-Sa'ad al-Abahiyah, favorable for building, sending messengers, beginning lawsuits, traveling, forming friendships, and marriage. Bad for physical exercise. Al-Fag al-Maqdim, favorable for everything except medical treatment. Al-Fag al-Tani, favorable for planting and sowing, commerce, marriage, medical treatment, and beginning lawsuits. Bad for building and voyages. Al-Batan al-Hat, favorable for commerce, medical treatment, marriage, planting and sowing, building prisons and strong rooms. Unfavorable for borrowing and lending money and for any kind of travel. The exact astrological significance of the lunar mansions and the methods of using them have been almost entirely lost, and there is much need for research in this matter. If we are to believe the ancient writers, they are of extreme importance, and much of the old astrology was based upon their use. In the words of Cornelius Agrippa, in these 28 mansions do lie hid many secrets of the wisdom of the ancients, by the which they wrought wonders on all things which are under the circle of the moon. Lunar aspects. Many students of astrology are in the habit of choosing favorable times for everyday matters by the rough and ready method of looking for a day when the moon's aspects are of generally favorable nature. A glance at the detailed rules contained in the latter chapters of this book will afford ample proof that a haphazard method such as this cannot be of very great use or reliability. But at the same time, one cannot deny that it does possess a certain value, and at least is better than no method at all, for it ensures favorable lunar conditions, if nothing else. The following notes on the lunar aspects do not profess to be more than a brief general guide and are by no means exhaustive. For full details we found in latter chapters. The lunar mansions and aspects, conjunction, begin nothing except things that are to remain private, hidden, in secret. Sextile, undertake work for influential or titled people and seek favors from them, good for short journeys, changes, new friendships, social advancement, and literary or clerical work. Square, bad for changes, travel, beginning new undertakings, and dealing with influential people, but unfavorable for managing the affairs of nobility, though less so than the trine. Trine, good for seeking preferment, managing the affairs of others, beginning new ventures, investing, speculation, and meeting important people. Opposition, good for dealing with titled people, but not with rich men. Bad for starting any new ventures or making changes. Conjunction, begin literary work, writing, correspondence. Favorable for preparing accounts, commercial transactions, sending messengers, dispatching parcels, and signing contracts and agreements. Sextile, favorable for study and for dealing with intellectual and scientific people, good for commercial work, and especially for entering into agreements or contracts. Square, it is said to be good for traveling, buying and selling, sending messengers or messages, study and dealing with influential people, bad for agreements and writing. Trine, good for sending children to school, beginning studies, undertaking mental or literary work requiring ingenuity, and for dealing with lawyers, secretaries, literary people. Opposition, said to be good for most purposes, but bad for contracts and agreements. Favorable for dealing with literary or clerical workers, traveling and study. Conjunction, favorable for pleasure, love affairs, and wearing new cloths. The lunar mansions and aspects sextile, favorable for financial affairs, love affairs, marriages, buying ornaments and jewelry. Square, favorable for sports. It is said to be good for hiring servants and for marriage, and this seems very doubtful. Trine, good for love affairs and for wearing new cloths, provided the moon is not in Leo. Opposition, bad for money and matters as it causes extravagance. Love affairs need cause caution. Conjunction, bad for journeys and for dealing with soldiers, doctors, and other martial people. Unfavorable for most purposes. Sextile, good for buying houses, weapons, tools. Good for chemical work and for contests and fights. Square, bad for all purposes except marriage, especially marriage. Forming new friendships and dealing with influential people. Trine, good for hunting. Beginning war. Starting controversies, lawsuits and fights. Buying animals and dealing with martial people. Opposition, bad for journeys, friendships, and dealing with women. Nothing of importance should be begun. Conjunction. So it goes through all these different lunar mansions. The rulership, this is called planetary hours. The rulership of the hours depend first all upon the days of the week, which are themselves ruled by the planets as follows. Sunday is ruled by the sun. Monday is ruled by the moon. Tuesday is ruled by Mars. Wednesday is ruled by Mercury. Thursday is ruled by Jupiter. Friday is ruled by Venus. Saturday is ruled by Saturn. The first planetary hour starting from sunrise in any day is ruled by the planet ruling the day itself. The succeeding hours are ruled by the planets in a definite and fixed succession, known as the Chaldean order, which is as follows. Thus, on a Sunday, the first hour from sunrise is ruled by the moon. The next hour is ruled by the blah. The next is ruled by the blah. The next is by the moon. I guess that's the moon that was done. All right, so hours of Saturn, hours of Jupiter, hours of the sun, hours of the moon, hours of Mercury. So I'm going to read hours of Mercury. This is favorable because today's Wednesday. This is favorable for general buying and selling, writing letters, signing documents, beginning studies, and other mercurial activities. It is good for planting and sowing and for sending children to school or college, especially when blank is well aspected by the moon or the woman. But in no circumstances it is favorable for marriage. It is a good hour in which to begin a journey, but bad for re-entering one's house after a long journey or voyage, as it threatens quarrels and discontent. It is favorable for borrowing or lending money and for matters concerned with apprenticeship, especially when blank is in good aspect with blank. It is a bad hour for buying houses or lands, engaging servants, or arranging bail for a prisoner. It is favorable for taking medicine, especially when blank is in good aspect with blank and blank and blank. And it is good time for seeking favors from influential people. If blank is weak and afflicted, there is danger of deception and trickery at the hands of others. Domestic elections, engaging servants. buying food and cooking, buying tools, household goods and utensils, commerce and finance, buying and selling, borrowing and lending generally, borrowing money, recovering money that is owing, pawning. The rules for this are the same as for lending money. Do not pawn any article when blank is afflicted or within 17 degrees of the sun, especially if it does not receive any good aspects, for there will be little or no hope of redemption. Making a will, making investments. It is not possible to deal with this subject in these pages, for all the information available is confidential and I am not at liberty to publish it. It will be obvious that the radical map must receive careful attention and that the fifth house and its lord are of chief importance, but the full consideration of the subject of investment and speculation belongs to the commercial branch of astrology, the laws of which are unlikely to be publicly stated for many years. Business and occupation, apprenticing a youth to a trade, learning any trade or occupation, learning any science, learning music, when learning any wind instrument, setting up in any trade or profession, engaging assistants, making contracts, partnerships and agreements, starting an employment or taking up a position, entering the church or beginning serious studies, electional astrology, friendship and favor, gaining love and friendship, for friendship with relatives and neighbors, reconciling people at variance. In the case of two brothers or neighbors, fortifying the ascendant and its lord, the moon and its dispositor, and the third and its lord, and let the lord of the third be in conjunction, a good aspect and in reception, by any dignity with the lord of the ascendant, if possible. If the lord of the third be in good aspect with the ascendant, the lord of the ascendant in good aspect with the cusp of the third house. Or let the lord of the ascendant be in the 10th or 11th, and the moon be in good aspect with either both of the significators. If the reconciliation be with a woman or between women, must be fortified. If elders or superiors are involved, attention must be paid. Visiting and setting out to visit a person, let the lord of the seventh be in the ascendant. Let the moon be in the aspect and the reception with any retrograde planet, for this ensures that the person shall be met. Joining clubs or associations. To accomplish desires or gain credit for undertakings, fortify in the 11th and its lord, if possible, place blank in the 11th or ascendant, or at least in sextile or trine to one or both of these places, and let him be in reception with the lord of the 11th, if possible. Put the lord of the 11th in the ascendant and the lord of the ascendant in the 11th. Medical elections, for the doctor to visit a patient, taking medicine or beginning treatment, giving purgatives, giving emetics. Place the ascendant, its lord, and the moon, and the ruminate, signs of which blank is the best. Let the lord of the ascendant be exalted, or in sextile or trine to the rising degree. Circumcision, let blank be exalted above blank, and applying to a good aspect to blank, and let the ascendant, its lord blank, and the moon be unaspected by the blank. Let the lord of the ascendant and its ascending in latitude place the blank in its dispositor in northern signs and succeedent houses. See that the moon is not an M, and the blank is not in any angle. Marriage and children, marriage. All right. Conception, children to the nurse, weaning children, christening children. Fortify the ascendant, its lord, the moon, and its dispositor. Place a fixed sign on the ascendant with blank strong in the first of the 9 houses, so in good aspect with the cusps of planets in. All right, everybody. This is Electional Astrology by Vivian E. Robson. Namaste. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Go to rarebookbusiness.com or audioteachers.com. This has been a 20-minute audiobook recording. Go to rarebookbusiness.com or audioteachers.com. If you need to give us a call, call 773-993-2065. Thank you so much for listening to Vivian Robson's Electional Astrology. Namaste.